The city was young once. Electric lights still hummed with wonder. Men in fedoras hurried through streets that smelled of rain, tobacco, and dreams. And somewhere, in the restless rhythm of early 20th century New York, a boy from Sicily began to build a quiet empire. His name was Salvatore Lucania, but the world would come to know him as Lucky Luciano. Not because luck followed him, but because he survived when others didn't. He survived poverty. He survived betrayal. He survived the endless shifting tides of ambition and fear that swept through the underworld of America. And in that survival, he learned the art of control, soft, invisible, complete. He was born in 1897 in a small Sicilian town near Palermo. His father was a humble sulfur miner, his mother a devout woman who hoped for peace in their son's life. But peace was a rare thing in Sicily. Even as a child, Salvatore heard stories whispered in courtyards, of men who disappeared, of debts settled quietly, of honor defended not by law but by blood. The Code of Omerta, the vow of silence, surrounded him like air. When he was 9 years old, his family left that old world behind and sailed to America. The ship's decks were crowded with hope. Families huddled under blankets, staring out at the gray Atlantic, believing that across the ocean lay opportunity. They arrived at Ellis Island, weary but proud, and settled in New York, in a crowded tenement of the Lower East Side. The streets were filled with shouts in every language: Italian, Yiddish, Irish, Greek. Children ran barefoot, dodging horses and trolleys. The air smelled of bread and smoke, and somewhere, within all that noise, a young Luciano watched and learned. He saw the way people survived, how small men became powerful, through courage, through cunning, through fear. He saw the gangs, the Five Points, the Eastmans, the Jews, the Italians, each fighting for a corner, for respect. And soon, the quiet boy from Sicily began to understand that survival was a kind of art. By the time he was a teenager, Salvatore had traded the schoolroom for the street. He ran errands, carried messages, collected debts. But he also smiled, listened, and built trust. Unlike many of his rougher peers, Luciano was thoughtful. He didn't rely on fists alone. He preferred conversation, strategy, patience. It was on those same streets that he met other young men who would one day shape history. Meyer Lansky, a sharp Jewish boy with eyes like cold steel. Bugsy Siegel, restless and fearless, with a dangerous kind of charm. They were outsiders, Italian, Jewish, immigrant sons in a world that did not yet accept them. But together, they built something no one had seen before, a network of loyalty that crossed old lines of ethnicity and tradition. Then came Prohibition, the law that made liquor illegal in 1920. It was, for many, a moral crusade, but for men like Luciano, it was a golden gate opening. Alcohol, once legal and ordinary, became treasure, and those who could supply it quietly were kings. Luciano began working under Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria, a powerful Sicilian crime lord who ruled through fear and superstition. Masseria believed only men from his own village could be trusted. He dismissed the younger generation as reckless. But Luciano saw farther. He saw that the old ways, loyalty to one region, one bloodline, were chains. To rule America, one had to think like America, modern, ambitious, efficient. So, while he publicly served Masseria, he quietly built alliances. He dealt with Irish bootleggers, Jewish financiers, and rival Italian crews. He spoke to everyone, promised nothing, and remembered everything. The profits from smuggled liquor poured in. Money transformed small-time gangs into sophisticated enterprises. And at the center of it all, Luciano watched, waited, and planned. But power in that world was never peaceful. Masseria had enemies, most notably Salvatore Maranzano, another Sicilian boss who dreamed of uniting all Italian gangs under his command. The city descended into what would later be called the Castellamarese War, a brutal feud fought in alleys and restaurants, with gunmen waiting behind every corner. Luciano, caught between the two, played both sides. He offered loyalty to each, but in truth, he was loyal only to the future. And the future, he decided, belonged to him. In 1931, the war reached its end. Luciano arranged a meeting with Masseria at a quiet Coney Island restaurant. They dined together, laughed, played cards. Then, Luciano excused himself to the restroom. Moments later, gunfire shattered the silence. Masseria lay dead. The young man returned, calm as ever, adjusted his tie, and walked away. Weeks later, Maranzano, now the undisputed boss, praised Luciano's cleverness and declared himself the boss of all bosses. But power, once tasted, cannot be shared. Maranzano too began to fear his young lieutenant. He ordered Luciano's death. Luciano heard of the plot, and before Maranzano could act, sent his own men, disguised as government agents, to Maranzano's office. They struck quickly, and when it was done, Luciano stood at the top of a world that had never known order. Yet what he built next was not a kingdom of chaos. It was a system, clean, structured, efficient. Luciano abolished the old title of boss of all bosses. No man, he said, should stand above all others. Instead, he created the Commission, a council of the most powerful mafia families, each with its own territory, its own business, its own seat at the table. Decisions would be made collectively. Disputes would be settled quietly. War, the old kind of war, would be bad for business. It was, in its way, a government of shadows, an invisible democracy of crime. And under it, the mafia entered its golden age. From construction to gambling, from unions to Hollywood, influence spread. Luciano's charm and calm confidence earned him both respect and fear. He wore tailored suits, dined with movie stars, and moved between luxury and danger as easily as others crossed a street. But he was careful, always careful. He understood that power was best held softly, like a secret. Still, no empire remains hidden forever. By the mid-1930s, law enforcement began to take notice. District Attorney Thomas E. Dewey, ambitious and relentless, made Luciano his target. He accused him of running a vast prostitution ring, not through direct involvement, but through organization and control. In 1936, after a dramatic trial, Luciano was convicted and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. The newspapers celebrated. America's most powerful gangster, they said, was finally behind bars. But even from his cell, Luciano remained influential. Visitors came and went. Messages were passed. Orders were given quietly through intermediaries. And when World War II erupted, the U.S. government came knocking once again. In 1942, American intelligence sought help securing the docks of New York, which were vulnerable to sabotage from enemy agents. Through intermediaries, they contacted the imprisoned Luciano. In exchange for cooperation and his network's protection of the waterfront, he was promised leniency. It was one of history's strangest alliances, the U.S. Navy and the Mafia, bound by necessity. After the war, his sentence was commuted, but freedom came with exile.
Luciano was deported to Italy, never to return to the country he had quietly ruled. He spent his final years in Naples, then in Havana for a brief, glittering season among stars and singers and old friends. There, surrounded by memories of his youth, he still dreamed of influence. He tried to regain control, to return to America, to remain relevant. But time, like the tide, pulls everything back to silence. He died in 1962 at an airport in Naples, moments after meeting a film producer who wanted to tell his story. They said he smiled, reached for a cigarette, and fell. Just like that. The man who had rewritten the laws of crime was gone. Yet his shadow remained. The structure he created, the commission, the families, the balance of fear and profit, endured for decades after him. Even as the FBI closed in, even as arrests multiplied, the echo of Luciano's vision continued. He had turned disorganized street violence into an empire of quiet profit. He had replaced loyalty to one man with loyalty to an idea. And in doing so, he became something larger than legend. He became the blueprint. Now, as you listen in the dim light, imagine him walking once more through a 1930s New York night. The streets wet with rain. A flickering neon sign above a bar door. The sound of a car idling softly by the curb. Luciano steps from the shadows, coat collar turned up, cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. He glances once at the sky, then disappears into the hum of the city. A ghost of order, of ambition, of America's darker dream. His story, like the city itself, is both beautiful and cruel, a tale of survival, silence, and vision. A reminder that power is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. So close your eyes. Let the hum of the past drift like smoke through your thoughts. The night softens. The lights fade. And the legend of Lucky Luciano, America's first true mob boss, dissolves quietly into sleep.